Welcome to a discussion about Picasso's 1925 painting, The Three Dances, or La Danse. This is an analysis of the painting based on my own research of the last approximately 30 years into Picasso's use of cryptic and occulted imagery and the significance of it. You're going to be seeing a completely different perspective on this painting as has been presented by the institutions and the establishment art historians. First of all, let's have a look at the picture. It's a fairly large painting. Was purchased in 1966, I believe, by the Tate. This was a picture that Picasso kept. He'd been asked many times to sell it, and he had it with him right up until approximately 7 or 8 years before he died. Picasso was extremely secretive, and he did use a lot of occulted imagery in some of his more important work. On the basis of an initial impression of the picture, what we've got is a surrealist type image along the lines of a crucifixion. One of the most significant entry points, it could be seen as this central figure, and its similarity with one of the cards in the tarot, the card of the Hanged Man. We can see the Hanged Man beside the three dancers. You'll notice that the legs in both images are very similar. This was, I believe, intentional. Picasso was very conversant with the tarot, and he, from an early age, had been fascinated by the idea of crucifixion. It was one of his principal themes. The concept of crucifixion relates to his name. His name, Picasso, means a type of stab wound, and of course Christ was stabbed with a spear. In a similar way, so was the Nordic god Odin. He was also stabbed by a spear in a form of crucifixion, in which he was suspended invertedly for 10 days. He had removed one of his eyes to gain access to the underworld and gain the knowledge of the runes. So Picasso's kind of playing with this idea. All these elements had significance to Picasso. The theme of blindness is very significant. There's a sort of chain of interlinked characters. Odin is the counterpart of the god Hermes. The Romans called him Mercury. The Egyptians called him Thoth. In the Hermetic tradition, all knowledge is derived from this character, Hermes or Mercury. So the Hermetic tradition, of which Picasso was very much a part, ascribes all knowledge worth anything at all to mankind to Hermes. The Harlequin, one of Picasso's favorite characterizations, again a personal symbol, was adopted by Hermes in the tradition and given all kinds of magical powers, including the ability to hide in any form and all kinds of wondrous abilities. And we're going to encounter the Harlequin in the three dances. He's actually in there, but he's concealed. And like a lot of the stuff in the three dances, you're not going to be aware of it just by looking at the superficial presentation. One has to take the picture apart to understand the mechanics of what's going on. So we'll go a bit deeper, but for the time being, there's a sacrificial crucifixion taking place. It involves this concept of the Hanged Man from the tarot. The number 12 is significant. It's the number of the sign for Scorpio, Picasso's astrological birth sign, and therefore a reinforcement with his personal symbolism. And what you're looking at is the three dancers with a green mask over most of the picture, except a concealed representation of the Harlequin. Now, the reason I say that is because one can see the silhouetted profile of the character, wearing his traditional triangular hat. He has a number of elements which distinguish him as the Harlequin. Principally, he's standing on a diamond. Now, diamonds and triangles are associated shapes that connect with the Harlequin and the idea of Mercury, Hermes, and so on. This is traditional Hermetic symbolism. So if you look on the wrist, there is a diamond in the form of what might be construed as a watch strap or something, and he's also standing on a diamond. He has something along the lines of his traditional costume, made up of different patchworked colors and so on, but this is it's a little bit of an extruded version of that. It's multicolored, and yet it's not immediately distinguishable. Picasso's Harlequins do tend to vary a lot. Sometimes the diamonds are presented as squares. It's a Hermetic symbol, so is the cube, and they're all relatable back to Hermes and Hermes Trismegistus, whom Picasso's occult friends associated Picasso with from a very early period. Picasso had this occult association with Trismegistus and the Harlequin. Cocteau mentions it in 1919, but others had mentioned it before that. Apollinaire had mentioned it. It was well known to Max Jacob too. So these were all people involved with the occult, and there were others. So here we have this concealed character of the Harlequin in the three dances. Now, here we have a similar image where the green mask has been applied, but this time I've left an area which seems to be in the form of a wine bottle, and it's resting on the arm of the Harlequin, a traditional symbol, again, related to the Harlequin. And Picasso uses this many times over, the symbolism of wine in connection with Harlequin. Wine was one of the Harlequin's traditional attributes. So here we have this form, and it looks like a wine bottle. We've got a very similar one in Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. Now, this particular wine bottle seems to contain a couple of elements that are rather suggestive. We have a female breast there on the left, and on the right, what appears to be the blade of a large knife inside the bottle. This is an example of how there is an association between the idea of intoxication with alcohol, wine, in other words, with the concept of seduction and Harlequin. Picasso uses wine and strong liquor to seduce his paramours, his amorous conquests. He gets them drunk and he seduces them. Here on the left, we have Au Lapin Agile. There we see Picasso depicted as the Harlequin. The suggestiveness is very similar to what we see in a number of Picasso images from this period. And moving across, we have another sort of similar one where they're all rather bored with each other. Nevertheless, there's some kind of suggestiveness, male, female, and this alcohol thing going on there. So really, this is just to show that the presence of the wine bottle in association with the concealed Harlequin in the three dances is all relevant. This is part of the traditional play of the Harlequin. Here we have the pregnancy theme. On the left, we have a circus performer, circus dancer. She's sitting on a cube. This is associated with Harlequin, and so is the wine bottle below. So we have this association between the bottle and breastfeeding, because that wine bottle has been adapted with a teat to serve as a baby's feeding bottle. Moving across, here we have the Harlequin himself, a Picasso sketch from a similar period where he is holding a child. He's holding a newborn. This is, again, traditional occult symbolism. The Harlequin He sort of represents the initiate. In the Hermetic tradition, the initiate gives birth to himself. And this is what we see represented here. Picasso uses this idea time and time again in his depictions, including Cubist depictions. Please refer to the videos on Les Demoiselles for more information. So the initiate is now sort of, he's given birth to himself. And then move across, here we have an alchemical print showing the Harlequin in attendance to this newborn. He's attending to the needs of this newborn infant. This is symbolic of the birth, the rebirth of the initiate. The Harlequin actually goes into the underworld. He undergoes a form of death, like Odin. From this journeying into the underworld, he re-emerges as a newly reborn being. Picasso employed a lot of this symbolism throughout his work, and in the three dances, we're going to explore a little bit of this pregnancy theme. What we see now is this combination of the breast and the wine bottle, and this rather foreboding suggestion of a knife. What's going on another level is that Picasso's offloading a lot of psychological information. He had this need to really offload the build-up of psychological pressures in his pictorial representations. And there are certain pictures which contain a huge quantity of this offloading. Quite rightly, a number of art historians have associated this with the breakup of Picasso's marriage with Olga Koklova, who was a ballet dancer. They lived together. She tried to tame him a little bit. She wanted really more of a bourgeois life. She didn't like the bohemian life that he was used to and which he loved so much. Steadily they grew apart. And she'd had a child, Paolo, in the 20s. Around about the period of 1925, it appears that something had taken place. And there's a suggestion here that Picasso is the crucified figure in the center. And in a way, the character on the right is the Harlequin, which is again associated with Picasso. So things tend to move around a little bit inside Picasso's forms of disguised personalities. But there is an autobiographical undercurrent to this picture, which is very strong. What I believe may have occurred here is that there was the termination of a pregnancy. It would seem to be, because of this profile of the Harlequin here, this sharp-nosed profile, which Picasso had used to represent his wife, that on one level it's Harlequin, on another level it's his wife. Picasso's keeping apart in the center the two figures on either side of him, and they take on the form of the two thieves at his own crucifixion in a sort of poetic sense. It's only my theory, I may be completely wrong. It's my idea that somehow there was the termination of a pregnancy, either a willing one or one that was not quite so willing on the part of the mother-to-be. This figure on the left, who is hard to identify, but it is possible that Marie-Thérèse Walter had had an underage liaison with Picasso. There was an admission on the part of Marie-Thérèse Walter, and public admission that yes, she'd met Picasso earlier, but there was still a lot of mystery around all this. In her last interview, I believe it was with Lydia Gassman, there were certain things that Gassman did not want to reveal, that she was told by Marie-Thérèse, secrets, very personal secrets about her relationship with Picasso in these early days. Gassman was told certain things that she felt very, very uncomfortable about repeating in her thesis, in her PhD. So she chose not to repeat them. But I think what occurred was that there was some kind of abortion at a very early age. And this is what we're really looking at in the three dances. I think on a personal level, this is one of the most important pictures. That's my personal reading on it. The idea of him keeping apart two women. It could be that Olga had found out about this and Picasso's keeping them apart. This is a possibility. And he's there in the center. We have a series of pictures related to this sharp-nosed profile. The first on the left is from 1924. More than likely that it's related to Olga, because it re-emerges later in La Statuaire, the third picture along. But before we see it in the three dances, the bridge of the nose has been removed and we get a direct straight line following on to the forehead. And in the fourth picture from 1966, we see it again. Picasso had a tendency to repeat personal iconography. Things re-emerge. The reason why I'm talking about this is to show the difficulty in identification. Now, the only picture there which I think can be solidly attributed to Picasso's wife is the third one in, La Statuaire. I think that's more or less been identified as a depiction of Olga. Now, here we see the profile again, but I've unmasked a reverse profile of a similar sharp-nosed head within the window of the open door behind it in the normal orientation of the picture. I should mention that now the picture has been inverted. Picasso incorporated a great deal of hidden imagery in this way into this and many other pictures, concealed things laterally, invertedly, and in other ways. He was very proficient at concealment. So on the one hand, we've got the dark-nosed profile that I've already talked about, and here we have its counterpart here in blue. The fact that this has been concealed into the frame of an open door is quite suggestive, because it leads us into the concept of the doors of the Temple of Janus. Picasso often incorporated classical themes into his pictures. He had a tendency to remold classical themes into his autobiography, so they took on personal characteristics and they reflected back on his own life in a very poetic and significant way. On the left we have a Roman period coin showing the head of Janus. He had this double-faced head, one pointing in the opposite direction to the other. He was the god, was associated with beginnings and endings, and of boundaries, and ultimately of wisdom. In some respects, he has similar attributes to the god Mercury, with whom Picasso strongly associated himself through this concept of Harlequin. Mercury was also the god of wisdom and the god of boundaries and borders. So there is this kind of interplay between the idea of Janus and the idea of Mercury. In the three dances, one of the doors is open. And what we see in the image on the right is a detail from a painting by Rubens depicting the opening of the doors of Janus. And when the doors of Janus in ancient Rome were open, that meant Rome was at war. If we take that back to the three dances, the fact that this door is wide open indicates a suggestion of war, perhaps between him and his wife. So he's viewing this thing in mythological, and on a mythological level. It's not my original interpretation, but it is something that I also ascribe to. There is this kind of linked association in the iconography of the three dances between this conflict between Picasso and his wife in 1925 and the idea of a real problem starting to emerge. Subsequent imagery in the official chronologies doesn't really show this in any great detail. Picasso goes on to paint and draw pictures related to ballet and so on and so forth, as if everything's fine and hunky-dory and everything. So it's not entirely sure the ground that we're on, but there is certainly this period that will come afterwards, where this furious period starts to come in, and we see the first inklings of it in 1925 in the three dances. Now, moving on with this idea of a conflict, Picasso, what he tended to do quite often was to represent this in the context of a bullfight. So what we've got shown here is the intermediate stage of that bullfight. What Picasso's shown is that this figure on the right, the Harlequin stroke wife, his own wife, is assailing him with a banderilla, one of the small barbed spears that's introduced into the shoulder area of the bull's flesh in order to further weaken it after the picadors first had a go at it. If you follow my cursor, in the three dances, he's clearly depicted this pointed arrow suggestion in the lower part of this arm. Now, he's done this for a reason. This is evidently has a purpose, otherwise he wouldn't have done it that way. And it shows that this figure, and here I've highlighted it in green, is thrusting at the heart of the central figure with the banderilla. It's very similar to what you see in these two pictures in the middle, except there's only using one of these barbed spears. I've highlighted another bullfight related concealed image in three dances as best I can. I think I possibly could have done a little bit of a better job. Either side of this are Picasso related horse depictions, and you'll notice how the front leg, one of them is raised. This was something Picasso was inclined to do, and there's an element following on from his theatrical involvement with the Ballet Russe. This seems to be Picasso's concept of the pantomime horse, incorporating the two figures each side of the central figure, who are going to sort of identify as Picasso. The way to read this hidden image is that it's a pantomime horse involved in the playing out of this bullfight, in which Picasso is the subject of the attack from the banderillero, stabbing into his heart in a very similar way to the way in which Christ was stabbed in the traditional Christian crucifixion. The image is more of a suggested image. When you go back and look at the painting, if you look at it for a few moments, there is this suggestion of a horse in the center. But I believe that this is what Picasso was playing with when he incorporated all this confusion, patterns and divisions and things. But there are significant images within this, so there's significant shapes and forms, not all of which I've been able to identify. Normally, if he draws a shape, it has a meaning, and this is where, in a similar vein, there's a suggestion of a bull's head in this central figure. It's more of an implied image rather than a defined one. This is one technique that Picasso employs in the concealment of his occulted iconography. Either side of this image, I've shown some 1945, 1946 bull depictions. I'm just showing those in order to demonstrate how Picasso could easily have incorporated it into this central figure. Again, I've employed a little bit of artistic license, hardly any. In fact, I'll show you with my cursor. I've gone across here, across the neck portion of the figure, and I've done a similar thing here at the arm level where the arms intersect the torso of that figure. So we've now left the bullfight arena, and we're going to look at some more details in the three dances. I've highlighted this letter P, which is concealed within the leg of this central figure. I've cut the shape off here, and I've ignored this additional foot. What we've got is a very typical Picasso device where he's incorporating letters associated with his name, and he often liked to focus on this name Picasso. One sees paintings quite often where he's actually sort of incorporated his name, spelled it out into the composition of the picture, and sometimes it's on the hat, the sailor's hat that he's wearing, or elsewhere, and he will incorporate hidden lettering and so on and so forth at times. Now we're moving across here. Subsequent to the three dances, about 4 years later, we get in 1929 this drawing here, where similarly he's putting in this kind of element here, and in fact there's a suggestion within this drawing that there are other letters associated with his name. This one perhaps being an I, and this one the O at the end of his name. This is not uncommon. Okay, moving across, this is a detail, all these are details of the handle of a sword, and we've got the combination of 3 or 4 personal symbols related to Picasso. The sword, like the spear, is a device, a weapon that can stab. So this is again a personal symbol. He employs it a lot later towards the end of his life with the Musketeer series. And here we see the Harlequin employed as the handle part of the sword. And the handle guard is formed by the long tail feather of a rooster sitting upon his head. Now here's Picasso's use of the combination of meaningful imagery linked together with a form of poetry, visual poetry, that only Picasso could really pull off, because this is his personal symbolism. Now what we've got going on here is the rooster was one of the main symbols for the god Mercury. And there are a few other peripheral associated symbols. Mercury is the central character in Picasso's personal symbolism. Mercury, Hermes, and he then transforms into Christ and other crucified gods. Basically, if you watch the videos on Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, you will be better informed about some of this material. So we have this device of a rooster, one of Mercury's symbols, sitting on the adopted son of Mercury, Harlequin, forming the handle of a sword, a personal device. And the whole thing, the whole combination of these elements forming a letter P. In the original, there are 3 experimentations of sword handles, each of which forms this letter P, which Picasso is associating with himself. Now, moving across, we have this sort of Cubist era depiction of some bread on a tablecloth. Here again, we get the lettering elements. The letters forming 3 letters of Picasso's name. So we've got the P, the O, and the I, the same as we see in 1929. Picasso played with his own signature. There are literally hundreds of varieties of genuine Picasso signatures. There's no such thing as a standard throughout his life Picasso signature. His signature varies a great deal, a bit like his style. Half of his work is in a unique style. Each picture is in an absolutely unique style. There's the things which are similar, but when you look very closely, you'll see that it's a unique style in itself. And this is one of the most amazing things about Picasso. This is what's one of the principal things that sets him apart from everybody else. He could vary his styles in an endless and limitless way. coming back to the three dancers, what we have are incorporated hidden elements of his own signature. So you've more or less got the entire signature. So to just run you through it, we've got the P element here, formed by the frame of this door in combination with the arm and the brown part of the torso. You'll notice that the image has been flipped left to right. And this is one of the devices that Picasso employs to hide meaningful things. The eye could be taken as this white area here of the Harlequin's leg, and then in combination with the other leg and this framework in the doorway, you have the A part of his name. So you've got the P, the I, the C could be this part here, A, I've already discussed, and now we come to the S's, and these are really significant. These are not the only possibilities, because there are other possibilities. This is absolutely typical of Picasso's employment of important concealed elements in his most profound pictures. So now these S's, we could have one here, it's quite possible, another one could be formed here, and then terminating in the O, which could be here, it could be here. There's a sort of fluidity about the whole business. But he's thrown these elements in, I am absolutely sure. Now, why would he do such a thing? Well, because he was fascinated by his own name. And we see an example of it here where he's experimenting with his signature. And one of the first types of signatures that he announced to the public in Barcelona, well, it wasn't the name Picasso. It was the name Picasso with Z, or Z's as they're known in America. This P-I-C-A-Z-Z-O, Picasso. And he employs this through, in the period of about 1898, 1899. He used it entirely for his first exhibition at the El Catregat. It was reported in the local press in Barcelona to announce the exhibition. That's what he was known as, Picasso. And so we get elements here with these legs, if we come back to the three dancers, where these legs could actually be Z shapes. This one, for example, in combination with the foot, which hasn't been highlighted, would form more of a letter Z. Similarly, this could be red. If it was flipped over, it can be a Z. So this is the way Picasso employs concealed imagery in his work. The incorporation of signatures are very, very, very important. The forms and so on, he plays with the image in a very, very extraordinary way. And one of the concealed images in the three dancers, the head of a rooster that can be connected with Picasso's principal alter ego, Mercurius, the god Mercury. And here we see it in a depiction of him on a card in association with Mercury. And that's one of his principal symbols, the rooster, the thing that heralds in the new day. There are other peripheral symbols associated with him, one of them being the turtle, because he played a lyre that was built from the shell of a turtle. Coming back to the three dancers, this is an image which has been incorporated in an inverted sense, but the picture is inverted. And here we have a couple more selections revealing concealed fish, aquatic life forms, consistent with hidden aquatic imagery in Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. Picasso often depicts himself in the guise of a fisherman. It relates to his alter ego chain of associations. Christ, of course, being a fisherman, characterized as a fisherman, and Picasso symbolically associating himself in many, many ways with Christ on a mythological level and a poetic level. I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on it, but one can see that there's an extremely violent aspect to this concealed imagery, a lot of sharp looking, dangerous forms there, fish, swimming through the picture, Piscean age. They're actually swimming in opposite directions. I've reoriented them so that they can be seen a little bit more easily. But they are in the picture sharing common elements in the composition, and they're swimming in opposite directions, and they're immediately next to each other. So we've got this kind of concept of the Piscean symbol, the astrological symbol for Pisces, the age in which we live. And this, as I mentioned to some length in the talks about Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. So again, it's a poetically linked images that are right in the center of the picture. And this is in a similar way to Les Demoiselles and Guernica and other pictures. Quite often the observer is given a sense of some kind of foreboding impression left by the picture. And it's really operating on a subliminal level. And this is really a magical mechanism to change the response, but in a concealed way. There is this component of him being from Malaga, a fishing port, and he did associate himself with the concept of the fisherman. I've shown a similar concealed form that appears to be a chicken, again, or a rooster, that I discovered in Picasso's painting Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. That's the picture on the left. It's again inverted. The painting is inverted, and right down the side of and going out of the frame of the picture and coming back in, you've got this chicken or a rooster form. The reason why I'm showing this is because apart from the mercurial relationships, there are other autobiographical concerns at work here on Picasso's part, I believe. This goes back to his early days when his father liked to paint scenes involving chickens and little farmyard scenes. They possibly had chickens in their own backyard. You can see that there is a consistency going on with the elements in Picasso's personal symbolism, and he has this tendency to incorporate the same types of elements, and they are repeated through his more important work. So the relationship between the rooster, Mercury, his principal alter ego, and the autobiographical reflection to a former time. Now, in the picture on the left is Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, and within it, in an inverted sense, there is the impression of a rather beautiful concealed toucan, a sort of horn-billed type bird flying through the picture. Extremely impressive array of birds and fish in that painting, all concealed. So coming back now to the picture on the right, here we have a very similar type of element, a concealed element, in the form of another hornbill or toucan type bird. So again, he's operating in the same way, concealing the same type of imagery as with the chicken and the fish and so on and so forth. So we've got this thematic consistency going on in his choice of hidden imagery. If we have a little bit of a closer look at the impression of this bird in the three dances, you can see that the beak is made up of this little moon, concealed image of a moon, a crescent moon here, which art historians have been aware of. Again, as with Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, there is a similarity in the themes of concealed imagery in respect to hidden skulls in the three dances. I've managed to locate what I believe are two deliberately concealed skull forms in the painting. This is entirely consistent with Les Demoiselles and with Guernica, and with Picasso's extraordinary ability to create hundreds and hundreds of varieties of distorted skulls in his other work, particularly in the so-called Cubist period. In the bottom right, we can see the concealed skull at the center of Guernica, having a powerful subliminal effect on the viewer, entirely consistent with the theme of the painting, death, and so on. Now, in Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, there are a large number of concealed skulls hidden between the figures and in other areas of the composition. Similarly, in the three dances, we have these two skulls, one right in the center, again, similar to Guernica, having a powerful subliminal impact on the unwitting observer. On another level, we have this other skull here incorporated into this excruciating looking figure on the left of the painting. When she's flipped over to the left, the elements of this skull start to appear. The mouth, the general shape, and the eye apertures. So I'm pretty sure that this was entirely intentional, a worked image. There's a reason why there's so many distortions in Picasso's pictures, and quite frequently it's because he has incorporated meaningful imagery. And this, of course, extends right through the Cubist period and the Surrealist, so-called Surrealist period. Large amount of hidden imagery in these eras, or these periods of his life. So the overall superficial impact is one of distortion. Regrettably, the historians have chosen not to really look and try to analyze these pictures to any great degree. They just read them on the superficial level, and consequently what they've provided the world is a superficial understanding of Picasso's art, and the museums are notoriously guilty of this because they don't really look at the pictures. They're more kind of always talking around the picture, not about the picture per se. They don't really try to understand what's going on in these paintings. And Picasso is very complicated personality. His works of art are extremely rich in content. There are more images, some of which, and possibly many of which, I've been unable to identify or resolve. However, one thing that I did become aware of is the theme incorporated on a cryptic level of the Crucifixion. Here in green, I have enhanced areas which I believe are the three crosses that one finds in a traditional full crucifixion scene. And it wouldn't be unlike Picasso to incorporate these additional elements. As I mentioned, the figures either side of the crucified figure seem to poetically represent the thieves in the central figure Picasso's life, albeit with some flexibility and movement between these characters. So what do we have? We have a traditional Tau cross with a form that could be interpreted as a head, all codified, but in the correct position. And then likewise to the right, within this dark area of the balcony and incorporating this door handle on the open door, we have another very suggestive form of a sort of modernist crucifix. So we have these three suggestions, which I think is completely consistent with a number of other Picasso pictures that I'm aware of, important pictures where elements of crucifixion seem to be very, very significant. Quite often these are hidden. Occasionally they're more visible on the superficial image, vis-a-vis Minotaur and Mackie, where we have the element of a Christ-like figure climbing the ladder in a sort of crucifixion, where again there's movement. Instead of Christ being on the cross, he's now on the ladder. I'll just bring in another image so that we can make some comparisons. I've incorporated a detail from Picasso's 1930 painting of the Crucifixion. The reason I've done that is to illustrate a degree of similarity in the three dancers. If we look at the 1930 painting, a number of the figures incorporated into the composition have these very small heads and very large extended bodies, massive gigantesque sort of arms and limbs and so on. And we have a similar thing going on here. Looking at the central figure, there seems to be a suggestion of a cross concealed within this area. If you look at my pointer, this area here. So we've got the kind of suggestion of a cross form with a cut-off top part of the cross. And in relation to that, this circle, this black circle, would seem to symbolize the head of the crucified figure. If that was the case, then the head would be very, very small compared to the size of the body, and which is precisely what we've got going on in the 1930 Crucifixion and a number of other crucifixions by Picasso. He went through this period of expanding bodies in different ways. We see this quite a bit. So there's this sort of hidden crucifix suggestion here. Okay, well, that's about all I can offer you in respect to the three dancers at this point, but it is a very, very complex picture, far and away one of the most complicated, and I'm sure there are many more concealments within this painting, but I'm still working on it. And I'll give you a couple of sort of ideas. One of them is this red area here under the arm of the figure on the right. It's got certain similarities with the suggestion of a dog's head, possibly that. The whole thing, in combination with the blue area below it, seems to take the form of an axe. There are different permutations of possibilities and things. There's certainly something going on around here, things which I would be very surprised if these weren't referential to meaningful images. This is my take on the three dancers, and I hope it's been informative to those who are interested in the picture. I'll do a similar thing on Guernica in the near future. Okay, thank you very much for looking. Bye-bye. Mendoza Ben Susan.